In this example, we're looking at a health service organization, and that organization is interested in the number of visits per person per year. We're told to construct a frequency distribution, a cumulative frequency distribution, a relative frequency distribution, and a cumulative relative frequency distribution. In our first and second column is our data set. The person number is just an identifying number. The second column is the visits per year for that particular person. In this case, person 1 visited 1 time, person 2 visited 2 times, and person 3 visited 5 times. So the first thing we want to do is we have our table already set up. The number of visits are broken down into a grouping of 0 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 11 visits. In order to make it simpler, we just click on the data in the observations cell, go over to sort and filter, sort from smallest to largest. Now we have all of our observations, or the visits per year, in sequence from smallest to largest. In our first class we have 0 to 2, so if we just highlight 0 to 2, we can go in and count them one at a time, 1, 2, 3, 4, so on. But if we go down to our system status bar, on the bottom of your Excel window, your Excel dialog box, you'll see a listing that you can select. If you select numerical count or count, it will tell you that the count is 10. So in our first cell, under the number of people column, we have 10. Now we want to go and count the 3 to 5, so we can go in and count 3 to 5 merely by selecting those. Looking at the count here, we find that there are 7. Again, we could just as easily go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and count the observations, but it's a little quicker if we just highlight them. Next is 6 through 8, so let's highlight 6 through 8. Check our count. That also is 7. Fill in the 7. And then we have 1 observation from 9 to 11. Fill that in. Now we want to get a total, so we do equal sign sum to calculate out the formula. If you open up the parentheses or just hit tab, it'll open that parenthesis for you. Highlight the data. You can either close out the parenthesis or you can hit enter and it'll tally it up for you. You'll also notice that if you highlight all of those values and look in your status bar, you'll see a sum of 25 if you've selected that. Again, right click and you can check the checkbox for sum, and that'll show in the bottom for you. In order to calculate the relative frequency, we take the value in the column A of 10 and we divide it by the total number of people. So we can go type in equal sign, reference the cell. We could do it manually just by typing in the 10, but this will make it easier for later. So we're referencing the cell of F7 divided by the sum, which is what we have down here. Now again, you could just as easily put in the number of 25, but I want to show you a quick trick that you can do as well. Once we have the F11 in there, we hit F4. It puts a dollar sign in front of the F and the dollar sign in front of the 11. What that does is it tells Excel that this is going to be a fixed cell. Normally when I copy, which I just did by double clicking on that plus sign, when I copy the formula down, you'll notice that the first cell was F7 and then it adds or increments the cell reference for me so that the formulas work out right. But in this particular case, the sum formula is still in F7. If we didn't put the dollar sign into the cell reference, it would have moved down and we would have had an F8 divided by F12, which would have given us a divide by nothingness, and we would have had an error. So that's how we get to the relative frequencies, and you'll see it copied down the border, which we can go ahead and fix that in a little bit. Our next step is to calculate the cumulative frequency. And the cumulative frequency is merely the tally of the number of people that are in all classes up to the class that we're in, or the grouping that we're in. So in the first case, we're looking at the number of visits from 0 to 2, and the number of people in that grouping is 10. But now, when we go to the second row, we want to know how many people total were visiting, had visits from 0 to 5 visits. Instead of just 0 to 2 or 3 to 5, we want to accumulate these two groupings. So what we would do is we would now take the 10 from above, and then we would add to it the current column. Again, we could do this manually in our head, write it down, but when we get to larger groupings, the number of groupings and the number of data sets, it gets a little bit more complicated. The other nice thing is, once we do this formula in here, we can just drag it down and get the totals, the cumulative frequencies, added up for us or calculated for us. So what this means is that there were 24 people who had from 0 to 8 visits in that year. This number, our total, should equal our total number of people here, because what we've done is how many people have visited from 0 to 11 times. And that we know is 25 from our original calculation. That's how we do the cumulative frequency. Now, what we do for the cumulative relative frequency, we can do the same thing as we have done for the cumulative frequency, only now we're looking at the relative frequency. So we would take the relative frequency here, and in our next cell we would take the relative frequency rate from above plus the relative frequency in the current class. Again, we can carry that all the way down, and in this case the cumulative relative frequency should equal 1 when you get down from 0 to 11 visits, because that includes the entire number of people in the sample, which is 25. Well, we left off here with a table that looks a little bit rough. Some of you are already aware that you can do a paste special and just paste the formulas in, and you won't have the problem of copying, shading, or border formatting of any type. But in order to reduce the confusion, I left that portion out of this tutorial. We can do it another time. But the easiest way to fix this is just to go and highlight the data that you want, the cells that you want. Go to the Home Ribbon tab, select your borders area, select No Borders, and then go back and select the outside borders, and there your table looks nice and neat the way we wanted it in the first place. The next thing we're told to do is to create a bar chart of this data in the number of people column. So to do that, we select the number of people column, not the total, but the number of people column. Go to our Insert Ribbon tab, and Excel likes to call what we call a bar chart a column chart. So select the column chart and select the first chart that you see. You'll notice over here Excel calls this a bar chart, which is a horizontal chart. We want the vertical, so we went with the column chart, first column, and there you have your chart. You can drag it around and move it where you want to. And the next step that we're looking for is to create a pie chart of the data. We already have the data selected, so all we have to do is go change our chart type and go to the pie chart. Select the first pie chart, hit OK, and there you have a pie chart. One of the things that you can do is you can right click on the pie itself, hit Add Data Labels, and now you can see the quantity or the number of people in each pie segment. Because we're only dealing with one variable, we really don't need a legend, so we can highlight the legend and then just hit Delete, and it goes away. Our final step is letter G. Create a histogram, frequency polygon, and Ogive using Megastat you'll remember that the ogive is really just a cumulative frequency polygon. In order to do this step, we will go into the Add-ins ribbon tab in Excel, and you should see Megastat over here. You notice that I don't have Megastat showing here. Why? Because I'm still selected on the chart. As soon as I move to another cell, watch up here, Megastat add-in shows up. I'm not exactly sure why it does that, but if you know Megastat was installed properly and it was there before, and you are on a chart and you don't see your Megastat add-in, just click an empty cell and it should show back up. Once we've established that we have the Megastat add-in, we select it, go to our second item on the list, frequency distributions, go to quantity, or quantitative, excuse me, and we'll get an open dialog box called frequency distributions quantitative. By default, the input range cell is selected. When you do the input for the data in Megastat, do not include the label. If you include the label, it won't work. We've predetermined what our classes are, the number of groupings we have for our intervals, and the first one is how many people had from 0 to 2 visits, so that includes 0, 1, and 2. And so the next one is 3, 4, and 5. So our interval width is 3. We want to tell Megastat what that is. We could leave it blank, and Megastat would use its own internal algorithm to determine the classes. And you can try it on your own. You'll find that Megastat comes up with a different number of intervals than what we have. So your information will be inaccurate compared to what we have already worked on. The lower boundary of the first interval, we're starting at 0, so that is 0. And we're asked to do a histogram, frequency polygon, and ogive. So the histogram by default is selected. We just check the polygon and ogive chart, click OK. Megastat takes a moment and creates a new worksheet tab called Output. If you do not change this output label to a different name, each time you run Megastat, Megastat will either add more data into this output tab, or it will overwrite the data. And you don't want to overwrite your data, and it's probably a good idea to go ahead and rename it as soon as you make it. Rename it to something that makes sense to you. In this case, we'll do a frequency distro output so that we know it relates to our frequency distribution tab. You'll notice, just as we had before, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different classes or groupings. 1, 2, 3, 4. But in ours, it says 0 to 2. In Megastat, it says 0 to less than 3. So what this is, the way that you would read this is to say that the first class or the first grouping is from 0 up to, but not including 3. You'll notice that when we have the frequency counts in Megastat, they parallel what we came up with in ours. And then we have a percent, which is our relative frequency, and in ours it's not a percent. So if we wanted it to match, we would just highlight the cells, go to Home, click on the percent button, and we should see the same numbers, 40, 28, 28, and 4.0. You can even add in, by clicking this, the extra decimal place that Megastat provides for you. The cumulative frequency and the percent, or the relative cumulative frequency, is listed over here in Megastat, and you can see that right here. Again, we can go in, change that to percent, add in the extra decimal place, and our numbers should match up pretty nicely to what Megastat provides. Underneath we have the histogram, and you'll notice the same categories or the same groupings, 0 to up to but not including 3, 6, 9, and 12. And you'll notice that Megastat puts the top value in the center of the histogram bar. Frequency polygon, and then our cumulative frequency polygon.